Hi, everybody. This is Jackie from Hub City. I am super excited to be here with Denise Kiernan and Erin Templeton, and they are going to have a great conversation tonight. And we're talking about Denise's new book, We Gather Together. Beautiful book, and she has sent us these lovely signed book plates. So we're very excited to have that. Oh, look, she's got some extras. Of course she does. So prepared. Yes, so these books are absolutely Let's get some for Erin.
It's empty.
So I'm just going to give a little introduction for both of them. It seems like a lot of people on here know them, which is wonderful. You can ask questions in the little ask a question button is Denise's preferred method for asking questions. If you're not sure where that is, feel free to just ask it in the chat. Also, any comments or anything else you want to say in the chat, just keep it fun, whatever you'd like to say. We have this beautiful Buy We Gather Together button on the bottom here. So that actually connects you to our website so you can purchase the book, and those will be the signed books. So Denise Kiernan is an author, journalist, and producer. Her new book, We Gather Together, arrives, it was November 10th. Her last book, The Last Castle, is September 2017. It was an instant New York Times bestseller in both hardcover and paperback, and was also a Wall Street Journal bestseller. She is also the author of The Girls of Atomic City, which is a New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and NPR bestseller, and has been published in multiple languages. She lives in North Carolina, and we're very happy to have her with us today. Also joining us is Erin Templeton. She is the Dean of the School of Humanities, Sciences, and Business at Commerce College, where she is also a professor of English. She focuses on modern and contemporary American literature. Most recently, she wrote the introduction to the 2019 handheld press edition of Zelda Fitzgerald's novel, Save Me the Waltz, and contributed an essay to Reading the Wasteland with the Me Too Generation. Cluster published in Modernism Modernity. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask and they will take care of those for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Erin.
Hi. So thanks for having me here to talk about your book.
Well,
super excited.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do it. Welcome. Welcome to Book Tour 2020.
Right. Welcome to my house.
The clean corner of my house.
Right.
And thank you to Hub City. For those of you who don't know, Erin and I have a history with Hub City. So this is our third Hub City event together, and the first one in this setting. So we will be back in person there at sometime soon. But it wouldn't feel like a book launch without Hub City and Dr. Erin Templeton. So yay!
Yeah, thank you, Hub City. And as Jackie said, you can get the book. There's a link at the bottom. If you don't have it, I thought that I knew a lot about Thanksgiving, as a person who has celebrated it for 40 some years now. And as it turns out, no, actually, most of what I thought I knew, I was wrong about. And I learned that in the last week, thanks to your book. And I say that just, I don't know, some of the folks here, like my parents, hi, Mom and Dad, who are with us, know that I specialize in American Lit. So I teach, the Pilgrims and the Puritans and the colonial settings. And even so, a lot of what I knew or what I thought I knew was wrong. So I guess my first question for you about this book, you start off by talking about origin stories.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your origin story for We Gather Together. Where did this idea come from?
That is, it's funny because every time you do a book, that question's coming and there should be a really easy answer to it.
And there isn't.
Sometimes there is, but I mean, honestly, when you've been writing as long as I have, which is longer than I would care to admit, is you have all of these things that kind of sort of, if you're me, one of the reasons I like writing is because I'm a curious person and I get curious about things and I want to look into them. It's that simple. And then I want to share that curiosity with other people. That's really it. And sometimes there's one thing that kind of sets you off in a certain direction. Like with the Girls of Atomic City, I came across one photograph that I didn't decide when I saw that photograph I was going to write that book, but that photograph is what kind of set me off in that direction. So with We Gather Together, which talks about origin stories, does talk about Thanksgiving and the Civil War, but also just talks about kind of looking at American history through sort of the lens of giving thanks. So one of the main protagonists in the book is this woman, Sarah Josepha Hale, who during the 19th century lobbied civic leaders and presidents to create a National Day of Thanks. So I came across Sarah Hale's story, I don't know, years ago while I was looking into something else. And I don't really write biographies, so I wasn't going to do a biography of her, but there was still something so interesting about who she was, and we can talk more about that in a second, but that I did what I usually do when I get interested in something, which is I start a file. So, I have notebook files, I have a bullet journal, I have, computer files, I have all those Post-its, all that sort of stuff. A lot of times I'm more interested in the intersection of characters and events than I am in the individual characters or events themselves. So the intersection between Hale and Abraham Lincoln and, so many writers that we can talk about too. And, the history of media and journalism. And those were interesting intersections to me, but it still didn't quite feel like enough for a book. These things are in your life for a while and you've got to really make sure there's enough there to keep you interested. But then I in the last, over the last several years, I've been thinking, I've kind of just like on a personal level, think about gratitude a lot and a lot of the research that's been done into having a gratitude practice. And, in the last decade or so, there has been like an increased amount of hard scientific research, on a neurological level about the effect of having some sort of gratitude practice in your life. And that to me was the linchpin. I thought, okay, if there is a way to come into this story, like that was my entry point into the story. If there's a way to come into this story through how have humans been giving thanks since they landed on this planet and center it around how our National Day of Thanks came to be. So this one came together in kind of a more cobbled way than some other projects. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this because, as I was reading this book, I could see connections, I think structurally and sort of thematically with your other work, right? Like you have Girls of Atomic City, where you have this story of these women, this collective group that none of us have ever heard of, like in this place where they were secreted away and they were so compartmentalized in their functions and their jobs that they didn't even know what each other was doing, let alone, like having any sort of broader awareness. And then we have the Biltmore book and the story. It's about him, but it's even more so the story about Edith.
Sure.
And the way in which she carries on, especially after his death, and really keeps that estate up and running and really, sort of turns not just the house into what it is today, but that part of Asheville, more generally speaking.
Totally.
And then we have, Sarah Hale, who is again like this woman who was just sort of in the right place at the right time, but it has been sort of not really erased entirely by history. Like as I was reading this, there were connections that were sort of ringing in the back of my brain, and I'd heard of Godley's, the magazine and that sort of thing. But you recover these women's stories and shine a light on these really important moments in our national history, the Manhattan Project and the beginning, like the turn of the 20th century, when we go from the Gilded Era into the modern age, and now this history of Thanksgiving.
They're all, I mean, because on the surface you'd think, okay, the biggest house in the United States and the Manhattan Project and Thanksgiving, what on earth do they have in common? But to me, I mean, they're all sort of, Girls of Atomic City was, it was the story of the dawn of the atomic age, but it was focused very tightly on this group of women. That's how I got into the story. And, The Last Castle to me was really the story of the shift between, like you said, the Gilded Era and the modern age, or like as the effect that the industrial age had on folks, the advent of the arts and crafts movement, all those things. But it's just all witnessed through those last dying days of the Gilded Age are all seen through this one the one lens that's the Biltmore House. And this is like, she is, Sarah Hale and Gratitude are just the entryway into examining, America's long history with, traditions and rituals surrounding gratitude. And, it's funny, it's people, I forget where I was and was doing a signing somewhere, and they were like, do you only write about women's history? And I said, I don't write women's history. I write history. There were women in it. You know what I mean? They were always there. Like Sarah Hale was always there. It's not that she wasn't erased. It's just that, or it's different than being, in a way, these people were never given the credit they were due when they were due it. So right. it's in a sense, it's just like reinserting people back into where they always were in the first place. People of color, indigenous peoples, women, you name it, they were all always there. So it's just a matter of kind of recontextualizing and like putting those layers back in. And frankly, they're more interesting layers,
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, they're there, but they're in the shadows.
Right.
And
exactly.
So you're kind of like, there with a flashlight sort of, illuminating these moments. Right?
Well, and it can be tricky because, it's, you have to look for different things to kind of, shine the flashlight on in those corners. And with her, I mean, this is a widowed mother of 5 with no formal education who becomes one of the most influential magazine editors in the 19th century. So even if you're not talking about the origins of Thanksgiving, that's already a pretty incredible story, made more incredible by the fact that she didn't even have a vote, right? Couldn't even vote in elections. So, when I think about what she managed to accomplish, even just from, and you as, a professor of what you are a professor of, just kind of from a history of American letters kind of way, it's pretty astounding, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, she, as you say, like she is educated by her brother, by her parents, and then sort of by her husband until his death. She's
like piggyback education. She said she was, she considered herself very lucky that she grew up in a house where they were just surrounded by books and told to read all the time. And then her older brother went off to Dartmouth. When he came home, he would share what he learned with her. He married a man who had her and her husband had study hour at night. They would sit from 8 to 10 and discuss botany or French or whatever. And he's one of the ones who said you should start putting your writing out there in the world.
Well, and it's amazing, especially in that era, because you wouldn't necessarily know it to look at our backgrounds, which are full of books, but books were a real luxury item at the time. Like you could not, unless you were a person of some means, like you didn't have access necessarily to books or, whatever book you want. There wasn't, public libraries existed, but they weren't nearly as common as they are now. There was no such thing as a paperback. And so, it was not easy to get books, which made them more valuable and made them more precious, but at the same time made them less accessible.
Exactly. And even the magazine, you know, so she becomes, you know, editor of this one of the most, if not the most read, you know, ladies magazine in the 19th century, Godey's Ladies Magazine. That magazine was precious to people who were subscribers, and you had this pass along readership. It was very common for you to like get your subscription, you'd read, you'd give it to your neighbor, they'd read, they'd pass it to somebody else. So, you know, one subscription might have like 5 households worth of eyeballs on it, because not everybody had, you know, the means for a subscription, or, you know, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, they were books, magazines, they were precious commodities.
So she wrote a novel.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I have read significant sections of it. Yes. I've read a lot of her stuff. It's okay. It was good enough to get her, it was good enough to get her novel Northwood was sold enough copies to get her offer of being an editor. And the language that I focused a lot on, where she talked about the institution of slavery, where she talked about Thanksgiving. Of course, she writes this just completely it's almost an entire chapter on a Thanksgiving meal. It's and you look at it from like a food writing history standpoint, and it's a really early example of the kind of just, you know, luxuriating in every ingredient that we sort of take for granted today, because it's, you know, Martha Stewart Living and, you know, all these other wonderful bmagazines. But she really went for it in that novel. But she was also, so she writes this novel, she wrote books of poetry. While she's editing a magazine, she anthologized other people's works as well, the works of other women, especially of women poetesses. She published unknown people in her magazine. She wanted only original writing in the magazine, which was not, you know, always the thing. A lot of times they, you know, would clip stuff out of something else and kind of curate it together and publish it as their own. And she wanted original writing. And, you know, one of my favorite stories, Sarah Hale was she published so many people before anybody knew who they were. She was publishing the work of this young male writer, and the review of this writer's work was, he's kind of boyish and his prose is a little feeble in places, but there are signs of genius, and, you know, he could end up being a, you know, a poet, you know, no less than Shelley, you know, so like he needs work, but he'll come along. And then it turns out this guy goes to West Point with her son, David. And David writes, and this was one of my favorite things, writes his mother, writes Sarah Hale and says, you know, I showed your review to my classmate, Edgar Allan Poe. And, you know, so she was one of the very first people to publish Edgar Allan Poe. And she had a relationship with him his entire life. And, you know, she published The Cask of Amontillado in her magazine, which, you know, kind of cracks me up, because I imagine these women like looking at dress patterns and recipes and how to set a table, and then walling somebody up in a crypt.
Right. How to brick somebody into their basement.
How to brick and mortar a body, you know.
You never know when that can come in handy. I mean, come on.
That's right. They criticize
life skills.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, and as you point, I mean, there are so many notable people that she knows and that she meets through this magazine. I think Poe is probably the most famous for, you know, a lot of our audience. But
well, I don't know. I mean, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Yeah, Hawthorne, Whitman, Emerson, you know, like a lot of the
Poe,
you know, the big names. But Poe is, you know, like he looms large in, you know, our imagination, I think.
She just published him once. I mean, she was instrumental in bringing his voice to the general public. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking, you know, I finished the book and I thought, you know, I wonder, because I hadn't, you know, I knew of her as an editor, and I mentioned I knew the magazine. I didn't know any of her other writing. So I like Googled it, like sort of wondering about, like, is it available? You know, because a lot of these books are not in print anymore. You just can't get them. And there's this bizarre like listing on Amazon of for Northwood that is, I think it's volume 1. I'm not sure how many volumes there are in the book. There are 2, but it seems
both,
like it. Yeah, I mean, like they're 19th century novels are not known for their brevity.
But you can go to, I mean, you ever go to Hothy Trust?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Hothy Trust has pretty much everything of hers scanned. So you can actually read the whole thing. You can read the whole thing on Hothy Trust.
Yeah, that's a fantastic resource.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the writing of this book. So how long did it take you to actually, like, when you got the angle, when the pieces started coming together?
I have no idea. I can never put a time on those things, because you get an idea and you start taking notes and you do research before you've decided to do the book, and you do research before you propose the book. Then you propose the book, and then you do more research to land on an outline. Then you decide to do the book. It's just, I don't know.
So I guess my question is, like, really what I'm getting at is, were you finished with this book before COVID hit?
Oh, first draft. Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's a lot in the novel, or not in the novel, in the book, that was just like,
oh no, that was so, okay. So yeah, no, so I was revising when COVID really started to land hard. Was going through the like revision editing process, and it was bizarre, because I looked at, when you write a book, because like I was saying, you go through all of these different, you kind of have an idea, you're not sure it's going to be a book. You think you want it to be a book, you do a proposal, see if there's enough research. You find out there's enough research, you do a proposal. You see if your editor's interested, they have feedback. Everybody decides you're going to do the book. You write a first draft that no one sees. Then you revise that. So by the time, and then like there's months of editing and proofing and production and copy review and cover stuff and all that. So that the book that the world your book is going to land in is not going to be the same world that you conceived of the book in. But wow, did the world change this time. I mean, there was, when I was wrapping up the first draft, there was talk of this, potential virus somewhere, but it was not, we were not in it, by the time March was, I was already on to revisions by the time it kind of really hit home. But I had, because, I look at Thanksgiving at different times in American history, and how people always found ways to, come together under difficult circumstances. World War I, World War II, Thanksgiving during the Civil War is a big part of this. Different events that took place during the Civil War and how they were celebrated or not celebrated, or, tweaked so you could celebrate. And Thanksgiving during the Spanish flu was one of those. And boy, when we were editing, that looked different.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading that section and was just thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I went back and I was like, I got to add a little bit more to this because, but it was very strange. It was very strange.
Well, and there are sections. I mean, there. I think there was a headline that you have about, what we would now call a super spreader event from a Thanksgiving dinner.
Thanksgiving.
and I just, I came across that over the weekend was just like, oh, you know, like,
27, it was out of an Ohio newspaper, 1918. 27 people became extremely ill from one small family dinner, and it was in the newspaper. After they had told everybody, they canceled a bunch of public events. Please keep it small. All the stuff we've been hearing for the last, couple weeks. So it was, that was really interesting. But also just the whole theme of finding ways to come together when it seems like we have nothing in common, when it seems like there's no way to bridge the divide. That's what it felt like in the Civil War. And of course, that's what it can feel like, sometimes today. So that was the element when I was thinking of doing this book. That was part of what drew me to this. It's like, well, we have this long history, with gratitude, and there's always something, everybody wants to be thankful for, their health, or, if you have somebody, I mean, in 2020, if you have a roof over your head and you have food and you have your health, you have hit the jackpot this year. There's a lot to be thankful for. And there were people who were trying to figure out how to do that, during the Civil War too, which is about as, divisive a time as you can think of.
Right. I mean, second, perhaps only to our current moment, where we keep having these conversations about crossing the divide and bridging the gap. And
but we've been, if nothing else, you look at history, it's like we've been there before. We can figure it out. We can absolutely figure it out. We've been there before. So that's that part of looking at that aspect of history was really interesting as well, for sure.
And one of the things that I really like about the book is the way in which you focus on key moments in American culture and American history, as you've mentioned: the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Depression, the influenza outbreak in 1918 or 1917. The moments sort of leading up to that, but you also point out the ways in which this is a tradition that is not unique to our culture. It's not unique to the United States. It's not unique to Christianity. That there is this history of gratitude in all major religions, in most other, in most settled countries.
In secular respects, there's it is in a way, we talk about this. My editor and I started talking about this book as like the biography of an idea, really. The idea of gratitude as a compelling human instinct, as something that humans have been doing since they've walked the earth, come together to say thanks for crops, the rain, we won a battle, whatever. And a lot of these things were very ritualized and took place in communities, and those practices, and it is a global phenomenon. It is a global concept, and one that has been and a timeless concept that has evolved over time. And it evolved long before there was a Thanksgiving in the United States. And our own Thanksgiving, from pre-colonial to colonial to United States history time, it has evolved during our time too. And that has been interesting. That has been interesting to see as well. So again, it's like using this global phenomenon of gratitude and giving thanks, and using it as a way to look at the evolution of American culture in a sense.
Yeah, and one of the things you talk about is the Americanness of this too, right? I love the story of trying to find American food items when you were abroad.
Yes, so that's fun. I start the book out. I've lived in Italy twice in my life, and I've lived in France once briefly, and I've traveled over there as well, and still have friends over there. And two of my funnier Thanksgiving experiences happened outside of the United States of America. And, it is, it is so weird. And if you've ever spent an extended period of time outside of your home country, you often feel like I feel more American outside of America than I do when I'm here easily.
Mm-hmm.
And,
For sure.
and I was very comfortable in Italy. I speak the language. I had friends there, I had an apartment there, all that sort of stuff. But this one, it's end of November rolls around, and it's not like Thanksgiving's being advertised, because they don't have that specific kind of, they have lots of other festivals around, giving thanks, but not ours. But you sort of like get this itch, like, well, it's time for Thanksgiving. I'm supposed to have Thanksgiving now. And you try and recreate it with your expat friends, and boy, finding cranberries over there when I lived there in the early aughts was just brutal. And you're running around like a crazy person trying to figure this out. And you just think, well, what's my problem? Like, why do I care so much? Why am I doing this? And then you realize how much certain traditions come to influence you, whether you're sort of consciously aware of it or not. And sometimes you need to get out of your element to really sort of view those. Really sort of view the way those things impact your life. And so I have long had a fascination with Thanksgiving, but that was definitely my experiences having Thanksgiving in France and Italy were definitely contributing factors to wanting to look at this tradition a little more closely, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I always have to preface this by saying this is not my mom's fault. My mom is a wonderful cook, but I think you called it the tube of gelatinous sugar.
Oh no, I called it a jellied tube of nostalgia, I think.
Jellied tube of nostalgia that makes a
yes
sound
when it pops out of the can.
Out of the can. For me, that is Thanksgiving. Like, yes, turkey, yes, mashed potatoes, et cetera, but like really we have to have the can, and it has to be the can. It has to, like, it's very, and it's not even about, like, I realized at some point it wasn't actually about the can. It was about all of the emotional associations and the memories and the nostalgia that are wrapped up in that can. That I can find on the public sale aisle once a year. And like, that's my contribution, is like, this is my childhood. I mean, it's, obviously not just my childhood, but, everybody who's celebrated Thanksgiving with me, like, knows, like, that's the thing. Like, the rest of it I can take or leave, including turkey. I'll eat it, of course, if you put it in front of me, but no, I have to have the ocean spray. But that was such a wonderful, I read that description and I just laughed out loud. Because you're absolutely right, and yet it is key for me. In a way that like
we all have those things that, and this speaks to the whole gratitude element of the book too, because gratitude is like the through line and the thread till we come into the 21st century and look at how important gratitude is for our mental health, our physical well-being, our emotional health. What is like precious to you, and and that you would be the most grateful for, is going to be different than what is going to be like everybody. It's a very personal thing.
Right.
So they're uniting experiences that have very varying personal interpretations and impacts.
Right. So do you have a favorite Thanksgiving food item?
Oh gosh. Well, actually, I like cranberry sauce a lot. I mean, that's why cranberries were a part of that story. And I would have killed, I think we did end up finding, I think it was a can. We couldn't find, I actually make cranberry sauce now out of cranberries. But yeah, I mean, the reason I could write that description of that kind of cranberry sauce is because that's what I grew up with. I have an image of what gravy looks like sitting on top of a disc of cranberry like that,
Right.
I know
you can even see where to cut it.
Totally. Yeah, it's perfect. They tell you exactly where to cut it. And it's all those kinds of little, I mean, the other stuff I love getting, I've made a turducken with people before. That's hilarious. I experiment with different kinds of stuffings. But I really do, and I do love gravy. I do love gravy. I could actually just eat a bowl of gravy. I love gravy.
Ooh,
I love gravy.
I'm not a gravy person.
I love gravy.
So this is an illustration of your point.
Gravy on cranberry sauce is to me fantastic. That's a wonderful little it's a wonderful little treat.
So I have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Actually, there are a couple, but we'll go with this is the first year that the turkey wasn't pardoned. Do you consider that ironic?
Wait, I thought it was pardoned. Are we sure? I thought the turkey was pardoned this year.
It was. So in the chat, they're saying it was pardoned.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was. But it's always been. I mean,
that actually would have been incredibly ironic. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was pardoned. He pardoned a turkey named Corn.
Corn.
Okay. A turkey named Corn. All right. I have the history of the turkey pardoning in the book, in case you're curious. So that actually started with Abraham Lincoln's son, Tad. So we'll talk. Thank you for asking that question, Maggie. We'll talk about turkey pardoning. So Abraham Lincoln's son, Tad, the national Thanksgiving that began our uninterrupted string of November Thanksgivings, the one in 1863, that Christmas, Lincoln was actually sick for that Thanksgiving. But that Christmas, they had a turkey destined for the dinner table. And Tad grew very fond of this turkey and named him Jack. And basically, when it was time for Christmas, the Christmas dinner was getting close. And Tad told his father, President Lincoln, he did not want them to eat Jack. And could they please not eat Jack? And President Lincoln said, okay. And he actually put the stay of execution for Jack the turkey in writing. So that was the first presidential pardon. And actually later, and I couldn't figure out a way to get this in the book. So this is something that's on the cutting room floor. So the following year, Lincoln was running for re-election, and Tad would literally walk around the White House grounds with the turkey. And there were people online nearby, people were online. It was election day, queuing up to vote or whatever. And Lincoln saw, Tad heading out with Jack or whatever. And he said, "Are you taking him to go vote for me?" And Tad said, "He's not of age. He's not of age." Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you, Mary. Okay, what else do we have?
Do you and your husband have a study hour every night? I think that might actually be from your husband.
That sounds like something he'd ask. It sounds like something he'd institute as well. So my husband is a writer as well. So we're one of those weird households where we both, when COVID really hit, and everybody was trying to figure out how to spend 24 hours a day with their significant other, I thought, this is the book I should have written, because I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And Joe and I are always home. Can we study? It was him. Can we study leftovers? I am in my house. It's like my whole day is a study hour with my husband.
I mean, you kind of do have that book, right? I mean, or at least you did write. You have written a book together about being writers.
We wrote a book about about how to sort of manage your life as a freelancer. So we talked to other freelancers as well, people who had their own salons, plumbers, graphic designers, all that sort of stuff. So we did, but I sort of when all of this happened, I almost sort of thought we need to revisit that whole thing, because there is my quiet time is really important to me, and it's important to him too. So and I think that's something that people who found themselves suddenly at home with their partner and not quite sure, you know, are we supposed to be talking the whole time? Like, what am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? I think there was a real adjustment period for people who, you know, like in the morning, I'll come downstairs, I'll say good morning, I'll get my coffee, and I go have my alone. I have to have my alone time first thing in the morning, you know, when I start. And we're both morning writers too, which is helpful. But yeah, study hour. Sometimes I do think it would be nice to have. I think the part of the challenge for everybody now being home and working from home, it's one of the challenges of working from home in general is you're constantly around your work. So you have to, it's kind of hard to separate your work from your life, but it's really, because, you know, they're intertwined, but it's really important to kind of have separation in your life too. So maybe study hour would actually be, maybe coloring hour, right? Coloring would be good for adults. Maybe I'll do that. Get into that. Okay.
What's next on your agenda?
Oh, I'm finishing up a play this month, which is very exciting. It is going to be
What kind of play?
It is a radio play. So it is being written to be, it will eventually be staged, but it's being written to be read and listened to. So it's an Audible original. So it's going to be going to Audible as a radio play, but it's going to be casted with different voices. And it's actually an aspect of a story that was mentioned very briefly in The Girls of Atomic City that I always wanted to explore further. So it's about a group of German scientists, actually. And I used their transcripts as a big part. Their conversations were they were taped. So the transcripts from those conversations exist. And so that's forming the bulk of the play. So that is what I'm wrapping up right now. And I know what my next book is going to be. But I gotta finish up that play first. And I'm also excited I think I'm allowed to talk about this. There is going to be a middle grade version of We Gather Together and a picture book.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
I want to come back to, I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to come back to the Audible thing because I love audiobooks. In fact, I listened to your book as much as I read it.
You got to hear me. My audiobook.
I did. Yeah. I've gotten to hear you twice now because you also read The Last Castle.
So we had to record the audiobook for We Gather Together in a makeshift sound booth in my living room because we couldn't. Normally, for Last Castle, I flew to. There's a big place in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and it's this just building of studios and directors and sound engineers. And this time it was me and a sound engineer and sound blankets and just like locked down in my living room, hoping someone didn't crank up a leaf blower. It was crazy.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing because you posted a couple images to your Instagram from recording the book. And I would not have guessed that it was in your house.
Yeah. They have me wrapped up pretty tight. Yeah.
That's amazing. So talk a little bit about what it's like to read your book.
It's
like out loud.
It's horrible. I mean, it's, you know, the thing about, and every writer I know is like this, that there is never, books get turned in because books end because you have a deadline, basically. I mean, every book I've ever written, if I were to do it today, I would do it totally differently, you know? So whenever you go back through and you read, you see, and first of all, there are always typos that make it past everybody, make it past me, make it past the proofreader, make it past the editor. And you get to see those, which is great. And you're like, okay, that'll get fixed in the second edition. And, but you know, you see stuff where you're like, yeah, I would do that differently this time. Yeah, I would do that differently. And not that it's wrong or bad. It's just when you go back and you read, it's just like a constant reminder of things you would have done. It's just always stuff you would have done differently. So it's a little hard. If you're having a good day, a good day is you'll like read for 5 hours and then go, I like that sentence. That's not a bad sentence. That's like, if you find like one, it's hard. It's very hard. It's very hard to read your own. It's hard to read your work. It's hard.
No, I mean, when I was younger in my writing days, one of my professors in grad school, it's a horrible writer, and like that was her advice to me, was like read your draft out loud.
No, I do that when I'm editing. But that's different, because when you're
different thing,
you're doing it for pacing.
You can go back and
you're doing it to change it. When you're doing it to record your audio, so it's great. I'm a big believer in, like, I print my work out and lay it on the floor to edit it, so I can see, that's what the pacing looks off. That paragraph's too long. That should be over here. I could move that over there. And I read out loud because you can hear what it sounds like. But that's great when you're editing, because you're like, wonderful, I'm solving a problem. When you're doing it, when you're recording your audiobook, it's like, oh, well, that ship has sailed.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see. Interplay between scarcity and gratitude is fascinating. And same thing for the social challenges and upheavals and gratitude. And do you have thoughts about either of those?
What was the second part? Scarcity and gratitude. I definitely have thoughts.
Scarcity and gratitude, and then social challenge or upheaval with gratitude. I mean, the book talks a lot about social, the social challenges, upheaval, conflict, tension, and the ways in which gratitude has helped us collectively, culturally, to navigate that. But then one of the cool things about like the latter part of the book is talking about like the practice of gratitude outside of the fourth Thursday in November.
Oh, yes. And that's the whole, and in a sense, I mean, what I wanted to do in this book is present an alternate, a new kind of Thanksgiving story, and really present Thanksgiving more as a choice and a state of mind, as opposed to just a singular day. In essence, like getting back to the true meaning of Thanksgiving, which is really very simply just coming together to say thank you. But what's interesting about this research that they're doing, and I get into it at the end of the book, but I mean, God, there's so much out there. They're looking at people's brains. This is your brain on gratitude, kind of. And
right.
And they can look at how one comparative study they did was they had one group. One was a control group that basically just kept a journal of what they considered to be events that were neither good nor bad. And then one group wrote about things that had bothered them, was on their nerves. And then the other group wrote about things they were thankful for. That was one study. And the group that wrote about things they were thankful for had, like, you could see there are different your prefrontal lobe, different areas light up depending on how that, it's astounding. But what was really interesting is these scientists talked about how important and how impactful the gratitude practice can be during really difficult times. And that was what was so in times of scarcity or in times of conflict, that the ability to find something to feel thankful for it is incredibly helpful for the resilience, not only of your spirit, but like your physically, emotionally, your body, everything, stress levels, anxiety, blood pressure, all of it. And that the impact and the long-term positive effects are just incredibly powerful during difficult times, during times of strife. So I thought that was very interesting.
Well, and it's fascinating to me because as I was reading this section, I was thinking about, all of it seems like, and I think it predates COVID by a little bit at least, several people that I follow on social like publicly posting gratitude journals.
Yeah.
You know, like lists of 10 things, first thing in the morning, these are things I'm grateful for. And, you know, I thought about that some, you know, just in terms of mental health. And I thought about it a lot more when COVID hit, and all of a sudden, you know, we're all in these incredibly anxious, isolated moments of fear and anxiety and stress. And being able to reframe that into a different, you know, to a positive, you know, despite all of the hardship, you know, like you said, do you have a roof over your head? Yes, I do. Like, do you have a job? Yes, I do. Do you have food in the cupboard? Yes, I do. You know,
and even if you don't, if you can find something, anything to be thankful for, that is health, that, you know, there are proven health benefits of that now. And you don't even have to say it like people are posting on social, which is fine. It's not something I would do, but that's cool. And it's inspirational for other people, I'm sure. But you don't even, like, they did studies where you could write a thank you letter to someone. You don't even have to mail it. Like, it's the act of doing it, of acknowledging the thanks, that has the real impact. So that was a good question.
Yeah. So one of the things that you point out in the book is the way in which Giving Tuesday has become institutionalized. As it turns out, that's today.
Today
is
that's right.
Today is Giving Tuesday. And so, just, you know, as we are sort of coming up on time here, I just wanted to say thank you to Hub City, to the Hub City Writers Project.
Yes.
You know, Hub City Writers Project is an amazing organization. It's, you know, the organization behind the bookstore that brought you this event, and has brought several other, I mean, they have several other events this week, and then others on into the winter. But also just do a lot for Spartanburg, for our community, in terms of supporting writers and, you know, in the literary arts. But, you know, one of the things that has been, you know, over and over again, you know, and it started early this year, I think, with the early celebrations of Christmas, but also like the early Black Friday, right? Like the commercialization and commodification of, you know, everybody I've ever bought anything from online emailed me at least 12 times in the last week, with different sales and discounts and, you know, commercials basically in my inbox. But, you know, today being, you know, another day of Thanksgiving, after, you know, the formal one, I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that, because there's still some time left on the clock.
Yes.
And are there other?
There are a lot of wacky developments of Thanksgiving that I think Sarah Hale and Abraham Lincoln would scratch their heads about, like, you know, football and doorbuster sales and all that sort of stuff. But I think Giving Tuesday, she'd be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, it seemed like she was very, I mean, she was very interested in supporting. I mean, you talk about this, like women's education and women's literacy, but also just other kinds of, you know, what we now recognize as nonprofit organizations, but would have been called, you know, charities or other, you know, would have other labels 150 years ago.
Yeah. Yes,
hi, Jackie.
Let's give thanks to Hub City. Yay!
I wanted to say thank you for that lovely shout out. We really, really appreciate, speaking of thankful, you guys' time tonight and the lovely conversation. And Anne mentioned it as well. She's the executive director. To thank you for sharing your time and intellect.
Always.
And we love this book, and we hope people come and buy it and support you as well. So
thank you. And support your local businesses. It keeps us all in a good place. Keeps our dollars in our communities, and it does lots of good to support the businesses in your town. So if you're not, you could be anywhere watching this, but, you know, whatever your town is, wherever
you are. And you know, I did want to just also acknowledge, you know, the huge amount of research that went into this project, Denise, because, you know, the book is super readable, very accessible. And then you get to the back when there's, the selected notes and sources, and it's like, whoa, like there's a ton of information, and it's really well researched. It's really thorough. Just all kinds of great stuff back there. So that's amazing. And yeah, we have the book to buy. This book, Hub City has other titles, many of which have been recognized by like Oprah and the New York Times and the Washington Post, and all kinds of Kirkus positive reviews and best of 2020 lists. George Singleton just got a shout out today on, I think it was NPR maybe.
Oh, great.
All kinds of good stuff happening at Hub City Writers Project. And if there are other books that you are interested in getting, if your curiosity is piqued about the Biltmore, for example, you can go to bookshop.org, and they also have proceeds that go to your local independent bookstore. I know this because I just placed a huge order for Christmas.
That's right. A lot of people are in places where they don't have. I mean, Spartanburg is super lucky.
And Malaprops is also amazing.
Malaprops, but there are a lot of places that don't have, would like to support independent bookstores, but don't know how. But bookshop.org, which look, already in the chat.
It's in the chat.
We'll
you can pick your favorite independent.
And Libro, if you're an audiobook person, Libro FM will do something similar. So there is still a way, no matter where you are, to direct that money to places like Hub City that support readers. They're a community center for readers, and they help writers who are just getting started, and they host, writers like me and people like Erin, so we can just run our mouths for an hour.
We can have conversations.
So we can have conversation with other people.
Exactly.
And we love listening to it.
Well,
are there other questions while we are wrapping things up?
Let's see.
Have we hit most of them?
I think you got most of them.
Something about, is there a way to overcome associations with anti-intellectualism that have to do with like the simplicity surrounding the idea of gratitude?
Oh, yeah.
I've never thought about that. That's interesting. That's a really interesting question. I've never thought about that.
Well, I think it dovetails with another one from Maggie about the importance of the moment and the crucial message of the book in a time when there is such strife and such conflict and from some circles resistance to expertise, to kind of try to maybe reframe that a little bit.
Well, I think one of the wonderful things about gratitude is there is not a culture on the planet that does not have some form of gratitude in its practice. None whatsoever since the dawn of time. So gratitude is, like I said, as a compelling human instinct. It knows no bounds. It knows no culture. It knows no party. It knows no country. It just is. It is a great unifier, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so important, because it's something that everybody can relate to. There is not a person who's ever walked the earth who has not ever had some experience with the idea of giving thanks for something in some form, in some way. So, yes, gratitude. Yes. I think we should end with gratitude.
I think we should too. And hopefully next time we can gather together in person.
Yes. Yes. It's going to be a big party at Hub City next time I get to come.
Well, thank you so much. We would love to have you anytime.
I can't wait, with bells on. Erin and I will do a show. It'll be fantastic.
We totally will. I mean, you're just up the road and I am literally like just down the street. So
we're all
say
set.
The word.
Yeah, we're all set. Thank you, everybody who attended too. Thank you so much for being so engaged.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Good questions.
thank you for everyone for coming too. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay.
All right, have a good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.